Hi there, this is Rick Jones of FishBait Solutions, and welcome back to From the Bridge. Speaking of welcome back, I'm just back from a 2-week trip to England to see my daughter, my son-in-law, and probably most importantly, my 2 grandboys. We've been speaking a lot about change, and I'll share some thoughts from what I saw and experienced on the trip. We're also going to dive deep into a discussion on the upcoming 50th anniversary of Title IX in 2022 and what that may mean for women in sports with my very special guest, Debbie Antonelli, who is one of the best college basketball television analysts out there. We're definitely going to take another trip up onto the soapbox, and I'll tell you about one of the best places I have ever eaten back on the road with Rick. So buckle up, the wind is up, and the waves are crashing, but you're safe and sound from the bridge. Yes, change is everywhere. We talked a few weeks back with Wesley Haynes about NIL and how this seismic change is affecting college sports and will for decades to come. As I mentioned earlier, I've just returned from a 2-week vacation in England. And yes, the combination of COVID-19 and the ever-existing threat of terrorism has made international travel, unfortunately, a real pain in the ass. Firstly, COVID still requires testing, and a lot of testing. When we got there, we were told that on day 2, we needed to take a test, and that if we were found to be positive, we had to quarantine for 2 weeks. So we were in a rural area in the southwest part of England in Cornwall, and we had ordered some test kits, and we took the test, and my son-in-law drove them an hour away to drop them off at a place to be processed, and long story short, we never heard anything back. We didn't know if it was positive, negative. Nobody cared, but they had gotten 100 pounds each from us for the 2 tests. And then in order to get back on American Airlines and fly home, you had to take a test 3 days before you flew. We were able to take that test at a pharmacy in England called Boots, which is kind of the CVS of the UK. And we had a sweet young gal that took our test and immediately processed them, and we were both negative, and we were able to get back on the plane and come home. But it was interesting. The night before we flew, we stayed at a hotel at a Hilton Garden Inn right at Heathrow so that we could turn in our car and just walk to the terminal and get ahead of everything. And that night, there's a man sitting next to us, and we heard him talking. He had flown in 2 days earlier, had to take his test, and was flying out the next day and had to take a second test. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. He's had a test 2 days before, but they're going to make him take another one, which is a little bit silly right now. But we're seeing that. I did hear where they've now they've kind of loosened some of those restrictions right now. And if you're a European that has had a vaccination, you can fly in here without any tests. So maybe I was just a little too early to be able to do that. You know, secondly, the mask rules, in my opinion, remain a little bit ridiculous, too. On the way over, you know, we had Attila the Hun as a flight attendant that, you know, wanted us to wear masks and then put them back on in between bites of dinner. You know, take a bite, put the mask back on, take another bite, which is kind of stupid. But nevertheless, we had to go through that. Fortunately, on the flight home, there was a more reasonable team that, you know, realized that if you're eating and drinking, you don't have to wear your mask. But I'm about ready to do that. I will say this, though, about masks. We have been vaccinated. I have had COVID. I have had the antibody infusion. It's still disrespectful not to wear a mask in certain places because of other people. And I don't see that as a violation of my constitutional rights. I just see it as doing the right thing and trying to, you know, to be a good human being as we get through the rest of this stuff. So my personal opinion is just to show respect where you can show respect. Thirdly, though, terrorism and airport security remain as they are. I still long for the days pre-9/11 when it was very easy and pleasant to get on an airplane. Now you pretty much get strip searched, and you have to, put your small items in a plastic bag and go through all that craziness with that. But here's a couple of suggestions for those that do travel internationally. Number one, if you don't have global entry, you need to get it. When we got to Charlotte, we actually flew out of Charlotte direct to Heathrow. When we got to Charlotte and went to customs, there were 5 other flights, international flights, coming in at the same time. So the line through customs was absolutely ridiculous, but we had global entry and there was no line. And literally you go up to a machine, they take your picture, they recognize you, they spit out a welcome back to the USA card, and you walk out of the airport. And so if you don't have global entry, you should get it. And the other plus to global entry is once you pay your $100 fee, then you also have TSA PreCheck. So it's really a really smart way to travel. The second thing is a thing called Verifly. It's the Verifly app, and it's a great app that loads your picture. If you have to take a test, it shows your immunization history, if you've had the vaccine, all kinds of things, and it could not have been easier to use, both on the outbound and the inbound. On the outbound in Charlotte, the gate agent at American Airlines, and I have no priority on American. Years ago, I had a lot of priority when we lived in Dallas, but I haven't flown them for years. I laughingly tell people I'm a god on Delta. I have so many miles. But American, I don't, so we were kind of, in the back of the bus, but the gate agent was thrilled that we had Verifly because she didn't have to input all that stuff into the system that slows everything down. So those are a couple of suggestions, global entry and Verifly. We plan a lot of international travel in 2022. We're going to Costa Rica for Charlotte's 60th birthday. We're going to France. We're going to have a house and a tour there. Going to Italy, going to Austria, and going back to England. I hope we can control this virus or at least learn to live with it because, unfortunately, we're going to have to do that. My guest today is the talented, lovely, and oh-so-knowledgeable Debbie Antonelli. Debbie played college basketball at NC State for the great Kay Yow. And you see and hear her a lot on both men's and women's college basketball games on ESPN and occasionally on CBS. She's the first woman to do commentary on the men's basketball tournament on CBS and Turner during March Madness. She's also a wife and a mom to 3 boys and does a significant amount of charitable work. And last but not least, she lives here in Charleston, too. We've got so much to cover today, so let's welcome my good friend, Debbie Antonelli, to the bridge. Debbie, thanks a lot for being with us today from the bridge.
Hey, Rick, thank you so much for including me. I'm so happy to spend some time with you.
Well, we've been friends for a long time, and I'm really, really excited about having you on the show today. We recorded these in advance. I think I find you in the Bahamas today getting ready to broadcast for CBS. So I'm glad you could fit me in instead of going to the beach this afternoon. But we got a lot to talk about. Let's start out your background, where you're from. Let's take it through high school, and then we'll pick up with you going to NC State.
Well, I did grow up in upstate New York, around the Hyde Park, New York area. My parents are from that part of the country, and we moved to the Research Triangle area in Cary, North Carolina, when my dad got transferred with IBM. And so I went to Cary High School and then NC State. And I had I'm the oldest of 3 girls. I had incredible parents and great siblings, and as you know, sport has been a part of my life since I can remember as a little girl. As soon as the first team that I was on was a CYO basketball team, and then the next team I was on was a Little League boys baseball team. So I've had a chance to really play my whole life.
Well, that probably helped you later in life, being the oldest of 3 girls, and then you get married and have 3 boys. I always feel like God has a sense of humor about things like that. But the fact that you had played with boys in the Little League, just a piece of cake for you at that point. Were your sisters jocks too? Did they play a lot of sports, or were you the only one?
Yeah, my sisters, they participated in recreation sports and through the rec department. So softball or one of my sisters was a majorette, so she was a fantastic gymnast and baton twirler. And, whatever we did, we had a well-rounded upbringing, but whatever we did, we were not allowed to quit. So if we started playing a sport, or like in my situation, my parents made me join the Girl Scouts, and I hated it at that time. I didn't realize the value of it until I was a little bit older. But, once you did something, you couldn't quit. And one of the things my mom had me signed up for was tap dancing. And I didn't like that either. And it wasn't until my teacher told me that Joe Namath used to tap dance, and then I was okay with it at that point.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
What you played? You went to NC State. Did a lot of people recruit you? Was it an easy choice going to state?
It's really interesting. The times are so different now. I did not get a chance to play AAU basketball. Everything was done through the high schools, and every school in the state of North Carolina recruited me, with the exception of East Carolina at the time. But my decision came down to NC State and North Carolina. I had scholarship offers from both. And since I was introduced to women playing college basketball and introduced to women getting a chance to get a scholarship through my experiences going to NC State games, of course I wanted to play for Kay Yao, who for 30 years became one of my incredible role models and mentors.
Well, she was one of the great ones for a gazillion reasons. Clearly a great coach in terms of X's and O's and motivation and all that, but probably a better human being. And now we have the legacy for her with the Kay Yao Cancer Fund. I remember going to her funeral, and it's the only time I've ever been to a funeral where the person that's being recognized and being honored was there. Remember, she did a video
Yes.
at her funeral. It said, "Hey, I'm in a great place. I'm worried about y'all, not me." And I never forget that. It was just amazing, and it was just so like her to, after death, to still be serving everybody.
That's exactly it.
Did she coach that way?
She did. That service quality is what permeates her legacy. It's how she wanted to be remembered, as somebody who tried to make it easier for someone else. And, from a basketball lens, that's the way we played the game. We played the game to make it easier for our teammates. So she counted on us to run the floor hard and make sure you box out every possession and do the things that don't show up on the stat sheet. I made light of this for so many years. I called myself the best non-stat starter in NC State history because I've started for 3 years and I had very little stats in the point and rebounding categories. But I played, I would average 29 minutes and I'd have no stats. How could you have a player on the floor like that? Who would ever do that today? But it was just the way we played. It was the value that you could bring, and it was how she made us all understand that you could be great in your role, no matter what your role is. If it's a player, or if it's somebody who's working, or if somebody who's becomes a mother, or in your family, it was all the same thing for her. It was about teaching people to do the best they could and to make life easier for others.
Well, she also came from a family of other sisters that were very involved in athletics. I mean, it's a great family story of all the impact that the Yao girls had and continue to have in college athletics. And so, I think she really served for you as a role model that said, you can do anything. You can be anything. You can dream anything. You can achieve anything. And I think that's a great legacy, too.
Well, there's no question. I fondly speak of my 30-year relationship with her as a camper, and then as somebody who was recruited and got to play for her. And then, of course, my broadcasting career, I learned a lot about the game from her. I really learned a lot about how to deal with people as well, because she always put people first. And one of the things she always used to say is, when life kicks you, let it kick you forward. It was one of her favorite sayings that she said all the time.
I remember her also saying, no stinking thinking. The mind, if your mind was positive, you would overcome so many things. That was just a big part of her her personality. Now, you get out of NC State. Did you go immediately to get your master's at Ohio?
I had a semester from graduating until I started my master's degree at Ohio University, and I was an assistant basketball coach for Elon College, which was exactly following sort of in her footsteps, because that's exactly where she started her coaching career. But I went to Ohio University. I got my master's in sports administration. I was a graduate assistant coach. And I went there with the thought that I was going to become an athletic director. I was tracking on that path, which led me to the University of Kentucky, and then as the director of marketing, which actually I was the first director of marketing in the athletics department there. C.M. Newton hired me before he hired Rick Pitino, if you go back to 1989. And then after that, 4 years at Kentucky. I spent 4 years at Ohio State in a similar job working for Jim Jones. And Archie Griffin. I reported to Archie Griffin, Rick, which is a little known fact about my career path, is that I've had the opportunity to work for two incredible brands, Kentucky basketball and Ohio State football, and some wonderful people in sport along the way.
Well, a couple of things you mentioned. One, the Ohio University, I call it the mafia. The graduates there are everywhere. And if you look across the spectrum of sport, it's just the imprint of the OU folks is amazing. And, my business partner, Mike Millay, is one who graduated there after he went to LSU and then went to Ohio University. And a lot of times we'll go, Michael dragged me along to some of those reunions at some of the big events and all that kind of thing. And then you mentioned Coach Newton. I was a college basketball coach at Sewanee, and he had played at Kentucky, and I got to be close to Joe Hall. Joe Hall had played at Sewanee. A lot of people don't know this. He played.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, Joe Hall went to Kentucky and played for Coach Rupp. And after his freshman year, Coach Rupp said, "You can't play here. You need to go down and play at Sewanee for Lon Vernell." And so he did, and he went down there and he played and used up his eligibility, and then he ended up coming back and graduating from the University of Kentucky, but he played 3 years for Lon at Sewanee. And so when I'm at Sewanee, first of all, C.M. Newton had been at Transylvania University in Lexington, and before he went to Alabama, and a lot of people forget Coach Bryant hired him at Alabama, the year Indiana won in 76, the last team to go undefeated, Bob Knight's team in 76, probably the second best team in the country that year was Alabama. They beat Alabama in the regional finals. And he had a great player named Leon Douglas that was just a heck of a player. But when I was at Sewanee, Joe Hall used to let us come when we would play Center College up in Danville, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. He would let us come shoot in Rupp Arena. And for a Division III program, that was pretty special.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was just that was neat. But Coach Newton was just good to me, and obviously his son Martin and I are really, really good friends. So you really did have some, you play for KL, you get to work for C.M. Newton, you get to work for Archie Griffin. And that's where you really kind of started your broadcast career, right? There was no one to do women's broadcast at Ohio. Was it at Ohio State where you started?
Yeah, well, I actually started in 1988. In November of 88 was my first game, Rick. It was at the University of Kentucky. We had a local cable company that wanted to try to produce sports. And we said, well, if you want to try, let's try a women's basketball game. And Debbie, would you like to do the game? And I was 23 years old. And I said, I was fresh off of college playing and being an assistant coach and being a graduate assistant. Of course I wanted to try it. It's not something I ever thought about as a career opportunity, because back then, if you remember back in the late 80s, the only game on television on the women's side was the national championship on CBS. So ESPN is still in its infancy, and there is not a lot of programming around women's sports back then. So I never really thought that was something that could happen for me. But I did some games. It worked into a package. Host Communications got involved, and we started producing and doing non-revenue sports at the time. Baseball got some games, volleyball got some games, but I was doing the women's basketball games. And then when I left Kentucky to take the Ohio State job, that's when I created a network there. I went to the local cable company and said, can you produce sport? They said, we don't know. I said, well, let's give it a try. Come down to St. John Arena. Tell me what it's going to cost to do 8 women's basketball games. Back then, the number was like $50,000. I said, I'm going to go out and sell the advertising, and then I'm going to get a chance to stay on the air and do the games. And that was my job, but it was also my passion. And it worked out where I created our own women's basketball radio network, and then helped advance the syndication of our that was a women's basketball television network, I'm sorry. And then I advanced the syndication of our radio network. So we had a statewide women's basketball radio network. And all of my 4 years at Ohio State coincided with one of the great players in the history of our game named Katie Smith, who was from Logan, Ohio. And so it was an incredible brand name, a local kid who was an All-American who took them to the Final Four in the first year. And as you know, when the product is good, you can sell it. And that's exactly what I did and how I got started creating my own network.
And then we saw the explosion of numerous cable, channels, and primarily ESPN, that began to realize there was a market for women's college basketball, and then you saw other networks beginning to do some stuff. How did you start? How did you go then from Ohio State into kind of doing it full time?
Well, so that's 8 years of collegiate marketing experience. And during my time in my 8 years, one of the most valuable lessons that I like to share is the ability to network. You know, I met so many people in administration that would make decisions about talent, about whether they were going to even put a package together for games. And so as I was doing games at Ohio State, I was starting to get opportunities on a more regional level, even ESPN. I think my first ESPN game was an 11 o'clock Eastern time, 11 p.m. tip-off in Green Bay, because that's when they would put a women's game on, right? And it was an opportunity for me to get a chance to see that maybe as this grows, my career can grow along with it. And we started to have our family. So we had one kid, and then I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this a run full time and see if I can make this work. And so that's how I launched really my full-time television and radio career. Is my oldest son, Joey, is 26, and I've been on the air for 34 years, but I've been doing this full-time for almost 27 years.
Well, your husband, Frank, where did y'all meet?
June 15, 1987, 9 a.m., first day of grad school at Ohio University.
Oh, wow.
It was our first class. There were 10 of us in the summer. There were 6 guys and 4 women. We went around the class and talked about who we were, where we were from, what we wanted to do. And ironically, Frank played baseball at Columbia University, and he played with 2 guys that I grew up with. One lived 10 doors down the street from me, and the other guy was like a family member. And so we had an initial immediate connection, and I have relatives from Long Island where he grew up. So we had a lot of similarities in our upbringing and our background, and that's how we met.
That's great. You know, I have a business partner, Ron Cook, and one of my favorite sayings that he has is, he says, coincidence is when God chooses to be anonymous. And I just love that.
It.
You know, if you look at the track and all that kind of stuff. And I know he's been a guy that's been extremely supportive of your career, all along. You've had a chance to broadcast some phenomenal women's games, but you've also been able to broadcast some men's games. When did that start?
Well, my first men's games were in the mid-'90s. When Doug Elgin, who is the just recently retired commissioner of the Missouri Valley, hired me to do the men's games. It worked out where the men played on Saturday, the women played on Sunday, and it was easy travel. And he had a lot of confidence in me and giving me an opportunity to do that. He thought definitely, I was capable of handling it. He told me years later that he called a couple of coaches in the league, and the guys in the league were like, look, you can put her on the air, but if she stinks, you better get rid of her. And he said that he never had a complaint, that things went well. And so I started really doing games in the mid-'90s. And then, obviously people associate me with the women's side, but the last 5 years I have worked for CBS on the first and second round of the men's tournament. And Rick, I got, that's a huge caveat on my schedule. That is a very exciting time to be involved in that tournament at the highest level, calling basketball games at the highest level. That's like the Super Bowl for me. So right now, my schedule's about 50-50, men and women. So I feel very blessed and fortunate that I get to work at the highest level in the game.
Well, you do a great job, and you're such a role model for others that maybe want to go into broadcasting, other women that want to do that. I'll tell you a quick story. One of your colleagues at CBS, I was a young high school coach on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, and I decided I would run a summer camp and, make a little extra money and have a summer camp, do all this kind of stuff. And I got this kid he was a junior, rising senior out of Duke University named Jim Spinarkle to come down and live in my house and be one of my counselors. And that year I had Jim Spinarkle and Al Wood. Al Wood had played at North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
And it was amazing to watch those two guys play one-on-one at night. So I got a Carolina kid and a Duke kid, both living in my guest room, for a couple of weeks. And it was a great story. And I think Spinarkle is a really good commentator on CBS, and I enjoy his work during the tournament too. Yeah.
He's fantastic. He's a great teammate, and I enjoy my time with Jim. He is a wonderful guy to be around.
Well, we're about to have the 50th anniversary. Can you believe it? I guess we're all getting old. The 50th anniversary of Title IX. And I was on a call the other day with Carol Steff, and she read the 37-word legislation that Richard Nixon signed. And ironically, it does never mention the word sport. Title IX, everybody thinks it was a sport law. It was an equality law. And it was a law basically that said if you're any institution that is taking any type of federal funding, you cannot discriminate. But that legislation opened so many doors, didn't it?
There is no question. I sit here with you on this podcast thinking about how fortunate I was during my time to be able to play, and how it's influenced and impacted my life, my husband's life, and my children. It's such an important piece of legislation that we should celebrate, because it is important, and sport is important. And you're right, it wasn't meant to be about sport, and it is referenced around sport most of the time with federal funding, but that's exactly why we get to do what we get to do and enjoy it at the highest level. Women's sports, I always feel like every year we're on the cusp of turning the corner, and now it feels like it's even a better time. But I think back to the passage of Title IX and the opportunity for me to play Little League Baseball. And I remember being on the field with parents yelling, "Get the girl off the field. She doesn't belong. She shouldn't be there." I can specifically remember vivid memories. And I have asked my parents, what was it like to sit in the stands listening to that, and having people say, "Get this girl off the field. She doesn't belong out there." Well, guess what? Not only could I play, I was good. I was second baseman, I was a shortstop, and I pitched. And I had guys throw at me, Rick. They beamed me in the head. They threw at me on purpose. I mean, I've had to recall and recount some of that as we get closer to the 50th anniversary, because I believe that back then, having the chance to participate in sport and to have the resolve and the stick-to-itness, right, because my parents would never let us quit, that I could move past all that and play because I love to play, and block that stuff out and be able to be tough enough to be able to finish. And I think that has helped me even today in my career. And it certainly has helped me in raising my three boys.
Well, I remember and fondly remember those pioneering athletes that really became role models, and mostly they had to overcome the prejudices. You had to overcome some yo-yo in the stands yelling that you didn't belong. I think about the great Jackie Robinson, and Branch Rickey was very selective about making him the first African-American to play in the big leagues. People forget the guy was a running back at UCLA, he had a college degree. He was a grown up, but he had a temperament that was going to be able to tough it out. I tell this story a lot, but there's a wonderful scene in the movie 42 where he turns to Branch Rickey, and Harrison Ford played Branch Rickey in the movie, and he turns to him and says, "Well, why me, Mr. Rickey?" And he says, "Jackie, I'm a Methodist. You're a Methodist. God's a Methodist." And that was his line to tell him it was going to be fine. It was a higher calling. It was designed. And then I remember another great story when Coach Bryant got annihilated at Alabama by Southern Cal. Southern Cal came to Birmingham and beat them 42-21 with a bunch of great black athletes, Sam Cunningham and others. And Coach Bryant, thanked John McKay at midfield, and they were good friends. And he said, "What are you thanking me for? I just beat you 21 points." He said, "Oh, no, believe me, thank you." Well, the next morning, a whole bunch of Alabama fans got up and said, "We better get some black players." And and the first guy he recruited was a guy named Wilbur Jackson out of Arkansas, who's, I think his daddy was a superintendent of schools and his mama was a principal. It was one of those kind of families, and somebody that could take it. And I do think about a lot of women that have had to overcome obstacles. You can't do this, you can't do that, and had to be stoic, and had to, kind of just take the high road in a lot of ways and say, well, let me just prove it on the field. Let me just show you that I can play.
Yeah.
But I look today, I think playing a team sport, I've always said this, is so essential to life. At FishBait and all my other previous agencies, we've always recruited a personality profile. And the trait was you had to have played a team sport, because, education's about doing your own work, but life is about working with others. And you learn that on a team. And like you said, you played at NC State and didn't show up in the scorebook very often, but you got a lot of playing time because you did all the things that nobody else wanted to do. Dive for loop balls, screen, rebound, block out, pass, do those. And that's life. That's what you have to do in life. And now I'm seeing women like you and other women in so many aspects of life, so many women, senior executives, CEOs, CMOs, COOs, and a common denominator is 90% of them played intercollegiate athletics. That was the difference in their lives. Talk about that a little bit.
No, I agree with you 100%, because no matter where you go, you're always on a team. You could be a team dynamic with your family, which is what we have. We call it Team Antonelli. It could be in the workplace. It could be anywhere that you go. You're never going to be void of a team. Unless you live a completely isolated life. But I think the intangibles that come with sport, the ability to overcome, to have the toughness, to believe when no one else believes you can, to put in the extra effort. And unfortunately, I try to live by this, but sometimes it's hard because there are times when people doubt or don't believe you belong, or, we've felt marginalized or not included or not wanted. But, I think the world is starting to understand that different voices are important and they matter. I try to go into my job and trying not to prove something, just trying to improve. When I sit down to interview a coach, and it's a coach that maybe I haven't worked with before or is not familiar with me and doesn't know me well, may have heard me on the air, but doesn't really know anything about me, I don't go into that situation trying to prove that I belong. I'm trying to improve. I'm curious by nature. I want to know how and why. And I think those things have helped me get past what might look like some sort of barrier, because, the two cliches that I only talk about in reference to women, and that is, don't judge a book by its cover, and you don't know anything about somebody until you've walked a mile in their shoes. And that is also important in the way we've gone about raising our middle son, Frankie. And all the things that I've learned from sport, from that time on the Little League field where somebody told me I couldn't, I have experienced that through the eyes of raising my son, Frankie, who, has Down syndrome and is a full-time college student at Clemson Life. he has overcome, and he has shown the ability to fight and compete. And I've been right there alongside him, advocating for him and for families like mine.
Well, someone asked me one time, I'm the oldest of three boys, and they said, when did you become so interested in women's sports? I said, it's really easy. It was the day my daughter was born. That changes everything. I mean, at that point, your whole perspective. But even though I was the oldest of three boys, my mom loved sport and loved baseball and was very engaged. And my dad was a federal investigator who traveled all the time. And my mom was the little league mom, the team mom, drove me to basketball practice, drove me to football practice, drove me to baseball practice, threw the ball in the backyard, did all those kinds of things. So, I grew up with a great female role model that loved sport and felt like sport was going to be a vehicle to make us all better. You talk about Frankie, and y'all have done a great job raising him, but you've got to just be so proud of what he has overcome. I mean, and candidly, you think about it, in a different century, this would have never happened for him. And yet we've realized that that the special needs children can do extraordinary things if they're given the opportunity.
That's it. I wouldn't even say another century. I'd say just a few decades ago, to be honest with you. The times have changed dramatically. And because times have changed, they have allowed for families like ours to experience our child having a chance to be a full-time college student and have the full-time college experience. And that's what Clemson Life has provided for us. It's provided an opportunity for him to live independently, go to class, have a job. He's in a fraternity. He's on an intramural team. He works as a manager of women's basketball. He is fully immersed in the college setting, and he is thriving because of it, because he was given a chance. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into getting him to that point. And he has, I run my mouth, he delivers. That's the way I say it, because I'm always advocating and fighting for him to have a chance. But yeah, we're so fortunate and we're blessed that our timing is such that, and there's a place like Clemson that he can go and really live his best life and make a lot of friends.
Well, I have a grandson, my oldest grandson, who has not severe autism, but pretty significant autism. And my wife and I were talking the other day about, he's 9 now. And we were saying, by the time he's ready to go to college, there are going to be colleges that understand autism at a different level. And there are going to be great opportunities for them. And so we're seeing so many strives, I think, in looking at the potential of every individual and saying, how do we make them the best they can be? Anyway, that's what I always loved about sport. It didn't matter who your mom and daddy were, or what race you were, or your economic background. Could you play? Can you walk across the lines and actually play and contribute? And that's the beauty of sport. Now, you do something that I think is phenomenal. You have this free throw challenge to raise money for special events. Talk about how you started it, and talk a little bit about what you want to do with it going forward.
Well, thank you so much for asking me about it, Rick, because it's something that's very important to me, and I think about it every day. How can I make it better, and what more can we do to raise money for families like mine to give kids a chance to experience Special Olympics? But it's called 24 Hours Nothing But Net. It's a 24-hour free throw shooting marathon. I came up with it 3 years ago, so we've done it for 3 years. I make 100 free throws on the top of every hour for 24 consecutive hours. We live stream the entire 24 hours on YouTube and Facebook, and we raise money for Special Olympics. The first year we raised $85,000. I shot 94%. The second year we raised $125,000, and I shot 89%. We moved outside to my driveway because of COVID, which has actually worked out great and has made the story even better, I think. And then this past year we raised over $200,000, and I shot 94%. And each year we have had almost double the number of donors. So our reach is getting extensive. We have added other states that are doing the exact same thing that I'm doing to raise money in their own state. And I would really like for this one day to be like the torch run or like the polar bear plunge, where Special Olympics has another event where in each state, everyone is doing something similar to try to raise money for their respective state. In 3 years, we're over $410,000, and I'd like to see that number get to $1 million fast.
Well, it's amazing what one person can do, and then getting other people to buy into that and be able to do that. I remember a few years ago, somebody posted the ice bucket challenge for Lou Gehrig's disease, and suddenly everybody, it just caught on, and they raised so much money from that. And I think this Nothing But Net Free Throw Challenge has a chance to do the similar kind of thing. And so, we need to figure out a way to get more people involved and more people doing the same thing, shooting free throws over 24 hours and promoting it and doing that, because you give people you give a lot of families that sometimes don't have the same resources that you and I have, the ability to say, we're going to provide some opportunities for your son or daughter to play.
We've just spent all this time together talking about why sport is important and why people should play. And it's no different for the intellectual disability or the physically disabled community. They need an opportunity to play and train and organize. And that's what Special Olympics does. It gives those young people a chance, and young adults a chance to compete. And trust me, if you've ever been around a Special Olympic event, they want to compete and they want to win. And it's fun to be around, and it's been such an important part of our family, and it's been an important part of Frankie's development overall. So we're really proud of him, and we're really excited about being able to help other families like ours.
And your youngest is playing at Emory and Henry, and that's kind of fun too, isn't it, to watch? My mother, my daddy would come to every game. I made my mother too nervous. I mean, she just couldn't handle it. She's just like, nope, I'm not going. I can't handle it. But you've had a chance to see him play a little bit this year already. Talk about that experience.
It is unbelievable to watch your kid, to know where Patrick has his own story about where he came from, and he was too small and too short, and, no one was going to really give him a chance. And we made some decisions about his development and how he'd go about training and competing. And he basically loves the game. And I kept him out of the circuit because I didn't want him to lose his confidence because he was small. And now he's grown and he's worked, and he's 5'11", and he's got a 40-inch vertical. And he has developed into a really good point guard. I like to say he's got a D1 point guard mentality and a D3 body, and he plays D2. So he's right in the middle, which really challenges him. But going to those games and watching him play is definitely nerve-wracking. I think it's the most nervous thing that I do right now. I could be on CBS or ESPN, and I'm more nervous watching Patrick. I think it's because we just want him to do so well.
Yeah, I'm thinking he may end up being your coach. I mean, I've always felt like his game, he thinks like a coach. He's a point guard.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, I mean, he just sees it all differently than other people, and he may be that. I want to go back to a closing segment and just talk a little bit about, even though Title IX, 50 years, great opportunities. Last year at the Women's Final Four, we saw some egregious differences. We saw a post where the women's weight room was, without being derogatory, was a joke compared to what the men had. And so it seems like as far as we've come with women, we still got a ways to go. How do we get real equality?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a loaded question for somebody like me, because there's lots of different directions that I could take that. I think I love that, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary and we're talking about equity, and there's no question we know how important equity is. And it's a federal law. In some instances, we have to do a better job of complying with a federal law. But then there's another component of it, Rick, that you and I have talked about before, and that is the economic part of the equity. I want the women's basketball. I want women's basketball to have a seat at the table where they have an equitable seat, where we're actually trying because of the product is so good that we're trying to sell our product, that we're in a position where we are looking at it as if it is an opportunity for economic growth, not just equity. And so I look at things from marketing and fundraising in an external lens. And I see so many opportunities for our game to have a seat at the economic table. But we have to be willing to make some significant changes in how we go about formatting our tournament and how we present our product. And if we're willing to do those things while we're talking about equity, we will be able to raise the bar economically. And I have some very strong opinions about it. I don't want to take up so much of your time, but if you ever want to do a podcast on the Sweet 16 to Vegas for women's basketball, let me know, because I could go on why I feel important about that, why that's so important for our game.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I feel, and I don't want to, here I'm an aging baby boomer Southern male, so I have to be very careful what I say, but I've never been politically correct, so why would I start now? But you can have a great program without being just like the men. In fact, I think trying to be just like the men sometimes is a detriment to the game. I love your idea of having the Sweet 16 in one city and having it in Vegas. And I mean, A, it's economically more viable. B, it creates huge interest differently. And I think women's basketball has to think differently about it. This year, all I've seen is two things, and they're both imitating the men. We're going to call the women's tournament March Madness, and we're going to go to 68 teams. And I'm like, you've kind of missed the whole point. The whole point.
Yes, that's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
That is what I call the low-hanging fruit. You're absolutely right. We're on the same page here. I've been talking about the Sweet 16 to Vegas, but to a destination city for 13 years.
And I don't understand why they don't want to try it. We find that in the opening round games that are home hosted, which makes so much sense, because here's the deal. If you're a 16 seed and you're in the NCAA tournament, don't you want to play in front of a packed house? Don't you want to have a unique experience that you go, we may have gotten killed by South Carolina, but what a wonderful atmosphere. And I think going to the home hosted first rounds did that. But then the regionals sometimes are not great experiences. And in Vegas, It would be a packed house every game. I love that idea. And then you go obviously to the Final Four, and that's going to be a packed house. So I think if we really want to consider the student-athlete experience, I worry about the bowl games. I mean, we're heavily involved in bowl games. Nobody wants to go to bowl games where there's nobody in the stands. That's not a great experience for the student-athlete.
I look at it, Rick, like exactly through that lens. Let's look at it from the perspective of a fan. Okay, the way the women's game is set up right now, there's only one school, maybe two, that would consider buying tickets to a regional. But the way we're set up, and this is not to disparage UConn at all, so I'm not picking on Connecticut, but I'm just stating the fact. There is a regional in Bridgeport or Albany almost every year. UConn fans are the only ones that can put tickets for their regional underneath their Christmas tree, because no one else in the country can do that. There's no way the NCAA is not going to send UConn to Bridgeport. They're going to send them there. They're going to be a first or a second seed. Most of the time, they're going to be the first seed, and they earn it. But no one else can do that. If you're a fan of the game at any other part of the country, you have to wait until Monday of Selection Monday. And then you're going to go, if you're good enough, you're going to play at home. But then you don't know where you're going for a regional. How do you expect fans to support our game when they don't even have the timeline to be able to do so? So we have that inequity right there for the fan is the way I'm trying to present it now. We want to grow the game. For 30 years, we've been doing it the exact same way. Why do we have to move it around? Moving it around doesn't actually grow the game.
No, I love what we've done.
The venue.
Listen, I love what the NCAA's done with baseball and softball.
Exactly.
Those cities have adopted to where it becomes an amazing experience for the student athlete and for the fan. If you're a great softball program, you're going to Oklahoma City. I mean, so.
And the coaches like it.
Yeah.
However, we've not been willing to take a risk because we have done it like the men. And you're right. Our rules aren't even the same. Men's and women's basketball rules are not the same. There's
Right.
so many differences in the way the game is presented. We have quarters. For some reason, everybody feels like we got to speed up the game. Okay, the men's game is, the women's game is like 250 on the average. The men are over 2 hours on the average. Okay, so there's just so many differences in the way our games are presented. We don't have to do the same thing that the men are doing. And yes, March Madness has been available to the women, and they chose not to use it. Going to 68 is just low-hanging fruit. It gets you equitable, but we're still missing the point about economics. And I think we are set right now with the way the product is, how good our game is, how balanced the sport is across the country. As at the time of our taping, South Carolina just beat UConn in the battle for Atlantis. And then I'm here at Baha Mar, and we've got 4 of the top 7 teams in the country playing in our women's event. We've got we've got NC State, Maryland, Indiana, and Stanford. Okay, nobody has a tournament like that. Okay, so our product is good, and we need to celebrate our product, and we need to put it in front of people in the right presentation. And baseball and softball have made Omaha and Oklahoma City destination cities when they weren't destination cities for those sports when they started. We need to do the same thing on the women's side.
I agree. One of my favorite sayings is the old Einstein definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for different results. I'm hoping that coming out of the Kaplan report, that there's going to be meaningful change and not perfunctory change or, like you said, low-hanging fruit change. But we'll watch it. Hey, good luck the rest of the basketball season. I tell people that you and I see each other more on planes than we do in Charleston. And we both live here, but I see you on an airplane all the time, and we're always off. And it's usually an early flight and a late flight. We're always running someplace and all that. But listen, I appreciate you being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Debbie Antonelli, who is one of the best people I know. Debbie, thanks for being with us.
Rick, thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
Let's jump back up on the old soapbox. Well, it's ever clearer to me just how divided our country continues to be. The recent elections in Virginia, which led to a victory for the Republican candidate for governor, and the election in New Jersey, which led for a victory for the incumbent Democratic governor, both of these elections substantiated our divisions and that no one party has any mandate at all for any legislation without engaging with the opposition. When you win 50.5 to 49.5, that is not a mandate either way. So I'm sick and tired of hearing from pundits and extremists from both sides of the aisle talk about these supposed mandates. And I'm even more tired of one party with a slight control trying to cram legislation down our throats, and I mean either party. Sometimes I wonder if I might indeed be actually in the majority. I'm a moderate, both socially and fiscally. I think I've told you before, I think I'm an Eisenhower Republican. What does that mean? Well, both parties tried to nominate the general in 1952. I wonder if there are any more moderates out there like me, those who know that only through compromise can we ever get anything meaningfully done. Of course, there's little drama with moderates, and we don't drive gross rating points for CNN or Fox News. And maybe that's why no one ever talks about us. And that's my view from the soapbox. Yes, I really did get back on the road with my trip to England, and I ate at a lot of great new places. I had wonderful fish and chips, great Indian food, a memorable French meal, and lots of wonderful fresh seafood. but the best meal I had was at the George Hotel in Stamford in the rural Midlands of England. Stamford is a very charming town, and they've made lots of movies that were filmed there, like Pride and Prejudice and the Da Vinci Code and a bunch of others. The George Hotel opened its doors in 1597. Yes, you heard me correctly, 1597. It was on the original post road, and it was what was called a coach hotel. So you got your horse and your coach, and you traveled north from London. And the hotel still has the space where you could drive a cart, a horse and coach into the very inn. We dined in the Oak Room restaurant, which is one of two restaurants in the hotel. The Oak Room is their formal dining room. I'll tell you an interesting story. Normally when I travel internationally, I always have a sport coat. But this time I decided not to check any bags. So I took 2 small bags on the airplane. I just didn't have any room for a sport coat. I didn't have one. Well, this formal dining room required a sport coat. So I told the person when we made the reservation that I didn't have one. She said, well, do you have a nice shirt? I said, yes, I do. And she said, well, we'll be fine. We'll loan you a coat to walk in, and then we'll let you lay it on the back of your chair. And when I got the deal, they said, oh, Mr. Jones, we've already checked your coat in the cloakroom. So we had a good laugh about that. But we did eat here in the Oak Room. I had a very traditional British dinner of roast beef from a carved tableside. Of course, it was medium rare, very thinly cut, with lots of gravy and horseradish on the side. Came with Yorkshire pudding, and for those of you that don't know Yorkshire pudding, it's like a pastry. It's almost like a croissant that you ladled tons of gravy on. That's just an amazing dish. Also had potatoes roasted in duck fat and a side of Jerusalem artichokes prepared 3 different ways. Charlotte and I had a great bottle of Italian red wine. It was simply an amazing meal and a great way to end our trip. The Oak Room at the George Hotel in Stamford, England, on the road with Rick. If you get to England, you need to eat at this place. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks to my good friend Debbie Antonelli for being my guest, and to you for listening in. I hope you'll join us again next week from the bridge.